welcome to the show, Jesse.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Thanks for being here. What else would you like our listeners to know about you?
Oh man, I have a lot of quirky hobbies. So I played roller derby, I trained MMA. I was a professional rock climber at, 13, 14, and 15. I start things and then the Lord makes me hand them off and move on to start new things, which is always frustrating because the grass is always greener behind me. And I wish
Mm-hmm.
I could stay, but he keeps moving me. So I don't know. I'm just a quirky person. So there's a lot of interesting facts out there about me.
Yeah, you need to share your roller derby nickname I heard from you last time.
Yeah, so my name is JCDC, which stands for Jess Cruikshank Dream Crusher. And that was
Hmm.
given to me by the staff at the wilderness ministry that I helped run. So the ministry staff that I led gave me the name Dream Crusher.
Dream Crusher.
And so then when I went
Wow.
into roller derby, I already had a name.
Tell me more about that if you don't mind. Dream Crusher. How did that work with the ministry setting?
So I'm a Gen Xer and I employed millennials and
Mm-hmm.
they had lots of aspirations and thoughts and things that they wanted to do and I would be like, "Okay, so if you want to do that, you're going to have to do A, B, C. How are you going to solve problem D?" And I would
Mm.
unpack the
Mm-hmm.
reality of executing such an idea and they decided I was a dream crusher.
So yeah, kind of a dream crusher, but kind of like a dream planner. But yes, I can sometimes, reality and like how to get there gets in the way of our fun ideas.
Yeah, and I wanted them to actually realize their goals, which means you have to understand what it takes to accomplish something.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I heard it in a kids movie. I can't remember which one, but a dream crusher saves you from your unrealistic goals.
Hmm. That's good. That's good. Yeah, that's helpful. Um, what is talk a little bit about your spiritual journey and what that's looked like for you.
Sure. I was raised in a Christian home, but my mother and my father had come to Christ as adults, and my mother had been a witch before in Wicca before she became a
Mm-hmm.
Christian. And so I gave my life to the Lord at the age of 3. So did my brother and my sister. I'm the middle child.
Mm-hmm.
And then I felt called to ministry at the age of 5. So you're in kindergarten, and people are, they ask you, well, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
And people are like, I'm a doctor, I want to be a firefighter, or whatever it is that they say. And I was like, I want to be a missionary
Wow.
because
Yeah.
in the church I had been to, we had these missionaries come from Indonesia and they would climb rubber trees and tap rubber trees. And I
Hmm.
was like, wait a minute, you can go to other countries and do amazing adventures for God. Like I was all in on that. So I wanted to be a missionary when I grew up. Unfortunately, I was in a church that didn't believe that God called women didn't that God called women.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
unfortunate.
that was crushed
Mm-hmm.
by not by my parents. My parents were very supportive, but that was crushed by my Sunday school teachers
Yeah.
and the youth group leaders. The story ends badly with my family getting kicked out,
Hmm.
in part because of my call to ministry. And I studied the Bible and I was really good, so I would argue with my Sunday school
Yeah.
teachers with biblical
Popular.
evidence. That didn't go well. And I also liked fishing more than shopping, so I
Hmm.
couldn't participate in any of the youth group activities.
Oh, for girls, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to college to be a high school teacher, and at the end of my college at the end of that, the Lord said, "Hey, I really was serious about that call on your life." And I
Hmm.
didn't end up going into education formally. I built a ministry that is in Wyoming. It's a Christian wilderness school.
Mm-hmm.
So taking that rock climbing and outdoor stuff and discipling other people. So putting those together for a deep immersion experience. So 40 days in the wilderness, backpacking, technical rock climbing, technical snow mountaineering for deep discipleship.
Wow.
So that's what I built with other people and ran for 30 years, or not 30 years. I was until I was 30, and
Okay,
so
I'm like,
then
I think we're the same age. you're the same age, and or else you're like you look way better than me for your age.
I don't have children, so I dye my hair. Those two things. They cause you to age less.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Children for sure. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So just I've been serving in full-time ministry since I was 22 at this point
Hmm.
in lots of different types of assignments. So now I'm coaching denominations and churches through Future Church Company with Will Mancini, Dave Rhodes, and Kelly Canwisher. And then I also started my own ministry called Whoology that is laser focused on equipping disciple makers and the emotional, relational journey of being a disciple maker. So it would partner with a curriculum, a discipleship curriculum, but it helps to teach people how to be a mentor.
Hmm. Cool. I'm
So.
curious. We kind of talked about this before we started recording that we're kind of be a little bit off the cuff, off script here. You mentioned like being a dream crusher, and then I'm thinking back to like your early formative years in church, where like the church was kind of crushing your dream, your call. And I'm curious, like, how do you differentiate? What advice do you have for folks to differentiate between like someone's like this is literally a dream that needs to be quote unquote crushed, or I'm just in a context that is crushing my dreams unnecessarily?
Well, so the answer to both of those for me has been what does God say?
Hmm.
So for me, the anchor was what did God say? And I didn't need other people to tell me the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, for them getting in the way, what I learned eventually was that they were opposing God by opposing what God had told me to do.
Hmm.
So then, because what I see is both crushing other people's dreams inappropriately, but also then fighting. You can do those in your own strength. Like those can be conversations that God isn't part of. So we can be trying to make our own thing happen as well, and we're missing God. And so there's no grace. And God's not codependent. And so he's not going to partner with us in unhealthy ways. He's not
Yeah.
going to just give in to our temper tantrums. So
Yeah.
the way that we find the path of grace is by hearing what God is saying, which is the thing, and
Mm-hmm.
then being obedient and walking in that space of grace, which is the thing. But that's what
Hmm.
I try to help people with. Because if you're in where God is, then He's going to defend you and He's going to make it happen. And you
Hmm.
don't have to be defensive and fight.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I'm thinking of. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Heather Thompson Day.
She lives
Sh
here in town. I don't
yes.
know her, but she lives here in town.
Well, I had her on the pod recently and read her book, and I feel like there's some crossover correlation to what her book's about, that kind of thing too. As much as like patience is not my strong suit, I feel like patience is a big thing that you're saying there.
Yeah, and her book is right on. Like
Right.
every plan I've had for my own life, God has resisted.
Hmm.
I mean every single one. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
have a family. I don't have a family. I'm married, but I didn't want to get married. And I didn't want to marry that guy.
Hmm.
I wanted to be a high school teacher. That door got closed. I wanted to study Antarctic moss in the south of New Zealand.
Wow.
That door got closed. Like every plan, progressively, every plan I've had for my life, God's like, no.
Mm-hmm.
And his plan has always been better. Now, I throw my temper tantrum.
Yeah.
I'm totally a slow learner, but his plans have always been so much better and they've satisfied parts of my heart I didn't even know I had. So like that whole walk of faith and trust, I'm not good
Mm-hmm.
at, but
Yeah.
God proves himself. So Heather's book is really great on unpacking that.
Yeah. Heather Thompson Day, if you're listening, there's some free advertising for you. University Press too. So, what have been some spiritual practices that have kind of helped you stay in tune, stay in touch as you're trying to discern, you know, what's the right way, what's God's way for you?
Oh man, I got it wrong for so long. I thought that you just like told God what you wanted, and then when he
Mm.
didn't give it to you, then that meant you were in sin and he was mad at you. Like that
Mm,
was kind of my programming and my thought process until my mid 30s.
yeah.
And it was in that whole 8 years of trying to have babies. losing four, so I had four miscarriages.
Wow.
And just that whole wrestle with God as he was actively, aggressively resisting me in all
Mm,
my areas of life.
mm-hmm.
And some crazy stories on how the lengths he went to resist me are pretty crazy. But what I learned is that I actually have to have a conversation with him that's not transactional. And I had
Mm,
no idea how to do that.
yeah.
And so he had to really work hard with me to get me to yell at him, to get me to express my emotions, to get me to own what I felt and
Mm-hmm.
say that.
Mm,
That took a lot of time for me. The Psalms were really helpful.
yeah, I'm
So,
thinking that.
yeah, so at this point in
Yeah.
my life, you know, 15 years beyond those lessons, I have a really casual conversation with God going on all the time. And he talks to me back, and I'm like, and I give him opinions. Like, I'm not so overwhelmed that he talks to me back that I don't ask a follow-up question, or I don't, and
Mm,
I'm not like, well, that's a dumb idea. Like, I tell God he has dumb ideas all the time. And then I tell him I don't know how to do it, so he has to do it.
yeah.
Because he's God and I'm just a person. But other things that are part of my spiritual practice these days are celebration. I
Mm-hmm.
celebrate with friends and just have joy, lean into joy at least once a month. And then in COVID, I added in grieving once a month. Like, so I have a
Mm,
ritual for grieving because it just gets so heavy. I also have prayer candles like Catholics because I can't pray for the things that are heavy on my heart like constantly. I actually have to like do work and do things. So I have prayer candles. I have a little shrine. It's not a shrine, but it could be a shrine.
sure.
For
Yeah.
so I have prayer candles.
Yeah,
Those
that's
are
great. I especially appreciate you're making space for grief. You know, I think that's one of the hardest things in in American culture, white American culture, whatever, that we don't make space for grief. And I think I'm really, I don't know, nervous, if that's the right word, about if COVID ever ends, or we feel like we've gotten past it, the kind of the grieving that we're gonna get just kind of skip over, and the consequences of doing that. I also kind of just appreciate your like having prayer candles, because I think like there are some things that I think they're really heavy, and man, do you really want to be praying every day for like, even just for stuff around here, like, oh boy, another like person of color got shot and killed like unnecessarily, like that's a lot to just carry, and I'm sure for especially for people of color. So that's a
Yeah, I
helpful.
mean, what I learned in my 8 years of wrestling with God was that I didn't have to convince him of something like he was holding out on me,
Mm,
or I didn't have to perform and pray enough to like, that's transactional, right? You have every prayer is a deposit
yep.
in an account that you need to get high enough for God to listen to you. Like, the big thing that I learned is that God is gonna be God and do God things, and He's actually in charge of all of history. So, like
Hmm.
my Trinitarian theology increased because my sovereignty of God paradigm increased, and
Mm,
so like God is actually good and actually in charge of like the big thing.
hmm.
And what am I doing? What faith does it demonstrate if I think God is actually bad and I got to convince him of something good? Or that God is
Hmm.
holding out and I got to convince him to be generous? Like that means I don't know who he is. And what I learned is that he won't participate with me there because if he did, it would be supporting and affirming my broken paradigm of him. So
Wow.
if I say, God, I don't know what to do. You're good, you're kind, and you're in charge. So you be that way here. You solve the problem. You be king of the universe. You be the provision of all things because this sucks and I need you to show up. And
Hmm.
I find that that's actually the prayer of faith and that's what he actually responds to. So my prayer candles demonstrate my intention and my heart and I trust them to be enough because at the end of the day I'm mortal and
Hmm.
he's sovereign and I need him to fill that space.
No, I think it kind of gets back to like something I heard from you earlier. Like it doesn't. It's not about like saying the right words or whatever. Like we might say like, hey, like that's not the right kind of prayer or whatever. And if I heard you right, and I'd agree, like I just don't think that's what God's keeps God up at night, so to speak. You know.
Yeah, and I
Well,
don't think he's bad.
yeah, yeah. Well, this is some great conversation. We're not even at the heart of it yet. So I had this a bunch of questions listed out for Jesse to respond to, but I kind of told her like we're just gonna try some stuff off the cuff because there's some as I was thinking about even leading up to this. But there is an article you wrote. Where's the? I was gonna try to find the title of it. Really recommend. It's called. Well, I lost it now. What's the title of that? I think it's from you wrote it for the Send Institute. See if I can find it. Oh, here
Yeah,
we go. Yeah,
I
what
serve
should
on the
we be
Missiologist
measuring?
Council, yeah, of the
Hmm.
Send Institute. So, what should we be measuring?
Yeah, what should we be? So if you go to sendinstitute.org/, what should we be measuring in ministry? We might talk on some themes, but it's worth checking out for sure. Um, but I wanted to ask you about. I was reading your title, and our listeners here will have heard it already. You have in your title, or in your bio, excuse me, the title neurobiologist, or can't even say it, neuroecclesiologist. So first, talk to me a little bit about like what it means to be a neuroecclesiologist.
Yeah, so it's a word I made up,
Okay.
which is
Fair
why you
enough.
haven't heard of it
Yeah.
before. So I'm a Harvard trained educational neuroscientist. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm from the boondocks of Wyoming. I went undergrad, I got a botany, zoology, physiology, and secondary science education degrees. And then I went into ministry full
Hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And but I wanted to learn how to teach people well because I wanted to teach them something once and have them remember with a high degree of accuracy because it was a wilderness ministry. So, like how to self arrest with the ice axe or how to tie into the rope.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
We
what
got
that
there.
quickly turned into was how to have a conversation in an hour or 30 seconds that changed eternity
Hmm.
because I didn't know how long I'd have with the students.
Mm-hmm.
And so the same brain processes that that have a good quality memory, with tying into the rope, they're the same with who we are as people. So I'm not talking about how to memorize effectively. That's a different
Yeah.
brain memory system. But the part that is our identity and who we are, I wanted to have that conversation once and have it change somebody's life.
Hmm.
So I studied the brain. My dad is a PhD in adult education. We just read a bunch of stuff. I applied it to the practice and eventually ended up going to Harvard to get my degree, my master's there in mind, brain, and education. So then the Lord called me to denominational ministry into the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a missionary to the church. And what I do is help the church think about how God made us to grow, to change, to develop, and help church systems because I'm also really great at organizational dynamics. So
Yeah.
helping church systems with that. So that's what a neuroecclesiologist is. There's a couple neurotheologians out there, but I don't
Huh.
have a Bible degree. I don't have a theology degree.
Uh-huh.
So I'm just super well read.
Interesting. So what does it look like again in your body you write that you apply experiential discipleship and I'm curious kind of what that looks like and how your neuro learnings inform that.
So I care about whether or not people follow Jesus, not whether or not they know Bible knowledge. That doesn't mean
Yeah.
I don't care about
Mm-hmm.
the Bible. I highly care about the Bible.
Yeah.
But if you just read it like a book or you're just about having a clear theologically accurate, pure,
Yep.
whatever your passion is there,
Yeah.
understanding of God, you will miss God. And you will think you're because the brain just can't be trusted. At the end of the
Hmm.
day, this is what I know. The brain and your
Brain can't be
understanding of the world
trusted.
cannot be trusted.
Hmm.
And so when you make the mind of man and the knowledge of God the highest good, you have just made an idol out of your own understanding. And that's why we have so much conflict in the church,
Mm-hmm.
through these different streams. And what I learned about God is he likes to keep secrets. He has specifically clouded things in mystery and has no desire to make it clear.
Hmm.
So why are we requiring clarity of one another
Mm-hmm.
when God has specifically clouded that? Like that to me is completely absurd.
Hmm.
So, and we're missing God because we're not with him where he is. And I always just want to be with him where he is. I don't want to
Yeah.
be out here on my own making stuff up just so I have clarity because that gives me a false sense of security. Because to live in mystery, in intention with one another requires faith. Faith
Yeah.
that it doesn't matter if one of us is right and one of us is wrong. Like we're just really children in the kingdom. We're just really children. We don't understand more of the universe than a 4-year-old understands of the world. And so I spent the weekend with friends and their 4-year-old, and he was really excited about the sky, and he was explaining the sky to me. He was
Mm-hmm.
explaining trucks to me. He was wrong on like most of it, but it was gorgeous, innocent,
Uh-huh.
beautiful, and I
Yeah.
did not correct him.
Yeah.
And so I see that God doesn't correct us either.
Mm-hmm.
How much does God actually correct us? And then when he does, what is he correcting us about? He's correcting us about a motivation of our heart, not our theology about understanding the Bible. Maybe our theology of ourselves, maybe our theology and our understanding of him. He'll
Mm-hmm.
correct us there. But when it comes to all of these things that we're just trying to answer because we've spent 2,000 years studying a book and we haven't asked God his opinion about all those things, and then he's like, I'm not going to tell you. You know, we are still just 4-year-olds in the mystery
Mm.
of the universe, and God is
Yeah.
content to let it be so. And so as a neuroecclesiologist, I will tell you that that experience of who God is, experience of my life as a child of God, and my relationship with you as brother and sister in the kingdom, that's how I actually know what Christianity is for, the value of the cross, the provision of the cross, like what is that, how does that actually change the storyline? So I'm really more about union with God than knowledge of God. Not because I don't think about reading the Bible. Please read the Bible. Oh, yes. But just hold your own understanding
Yeah.
loosely.
You know, I love that you're saying that because I think, to be honest, like I think you and I probably disagree on a lot of theological matters, but I really connect with your point about like how do you say it, like following the way of Jesus being the thing that's important. I'm curious, like what you think about like for the last what would we say 500 years more, you know, since going back to Luther, like knowing and thinking the right thing has been like, at least in my perspective, like the defining nature of what it means to be Christian. Like, do you see this as being like a sea change of of um,
I do.
of less on, as we might say, orthodoxy versus orthopraxy?
Right. So you've got orthodoxy, orthopathy, and when they, so that's that you have that you love the same as God, right? Because
Mm.
you can take the knowledge of God.
Orthopathy? That's the
Yeah,
word?
orthopathy. It is. Yeah.
I
So
like that.
orthodoxy,
Orthopathy.
orthopathy yield orthopraxy.
Hmm. Okay.
So you can what I see is people who have a knowledge of God but no love of God, and they become abusive.
Hmm. Yep. Yep.
So that's why you need that orthopathy,
Yeah.
right? And if you have the love of God but no understanding, you can't actually make a disciple. You may live as a disciple really
Mm-hmm.
well, but you can't make a disciple. And
Hmm.
so what Jesus calls us to is that both and, right? Nobody ever gets out of anything. It's
Yeah.
always all the things, and Jesus says, I will help you.
Hmm.
So the orthopraxy, I do see this as a sea change because the enlightenment and all of that and the disenchantment of
Yep.
faith, and I'm a Pentecostal charismatic
Yeah.
neuroscientist. So I'm kind of a unique duck.
Hold a lot.
um,
You hold a lot in tension, right?
I do, but I love it because
Yeah.
again, I want to be with God where he is and he holds it all in tension.
Yeah.
So to me, that's my discipleship journey, is to love the way he loves, see the way he sees, speak with his tone, and then in his timing, like all of that coming together matters. And so I think as we have moved beyond truth as society into this place where it's so relative, it's so deconstructed, and you can't trust anybody, we,
Mm-hmm.
to me, the only thing that gets us through that and the point of it is to come back to that solid anchor, which is the thou thy, the thou I
Yeah,
relationship of
Martin Buber.
who do
Yeah.
you say I am, and that's where
Mm-hmm.
I am found.
Hmm. I'm thinking about this. Uh, what's fresh in my mind was I just listened to episode 6 of the Mars Hill podcast. So some more free shout outs for some folks. And I'm thinking about, obviously Driscoll's character was quite the character, and I think of someone who seemed to, at least from my perspective, elevate thinking the right thing over loving. And I'm also thinking the how they kind of in that episode kind of highlight kind of the neo reformed, I don't know what the word to be, reformed theology has really taken root in, I mean, I'm not a reformed theologian, but in my experience with it, it really seems to be there's a lot about like thinking the right thing. And I'm curious, like, do you think some of that is just reactionary to this kind of drifting or changing towards a more orthopathic or orthopraxis?
No, because I think it's 500 years old and 500 years in the making. When
Oh.
you disenchant, when you take emotion out of your relationship with God. So
Hmm.
so in the Enlightenment, they wanted everything. It was enchanted before that, which meant
Right.
it had
Right.
magic, it had mystery, it had emotion. You had chivalry, right? That's a very passionate
Hmm.
way of thinking about the world, right? The Middle Ages were they were full of so
Hmm.
much romanticism and mystery and dragons and fairies and all the things. And then the Enlightenment comes and we rediscover science, and I'm extremely pro science. I have like 9 science degrees.
Yeah.
But you begin to measure things, and then you think
Mhm.
the only thing that exists is what you measure, and
Yeah.
it only exists as you defined by you by how you measure it. And
Yeah.
then we started doing that to scripture, right? And that, I mean, theology is a science. It's a measuring of scripture, and you develop a hermeneutic. And look, have a good hermeneutic, please, but
Hmm.
also understand that's a human development, a human constraint on scripture,
Hmm.
because Jesus didn't read with the same hermeneutic that you
Yeah.
did. Paul
Yeah.
didn't interpret the Old Testament in the same way you did, right? His hermeneutic would not survive most Reformed Bible theologies, seminaries.
Hmm.
Paul would be a heretic in his process of understanding scripture. And so we've got 500 years in the making of eliminating emotion, killing the heart, and therefore killing the soul, and making a person's understanding and therefore the purity of that the highest good. And I'm
Hmm.
a brain scientist, and I can tell you that there's a part of your brain dedicated to lying to you.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
making the brain and your understanding the highest good is really shaky, bad ground.
Say that again for me. Making your.
Making your brain and your understanding of things the highest good is extremely shaky ground,
Hmm. Hmm.
because you're not created to grasp all of that. God made
Yeah.
us in a way that we're dependent on an external truth.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking, just the practical from a practical perspective, like the importance of like mentors, and I mean that was another theme from episode 6 of the podcast. Was a certain person was just like, "Hey, I don't need it. I don't need a mentor. I don't need a spiritual authority or
Yeah.
whatever." So that's really interesting. That's really interesting. There's a part of your brain, our brains, that are dedicated to lying to us. I mean, it, I can see there being negatives and positives to that, right? The
So it's your left temporal lobe. It's called the
Mhm.
interpreter, and its role is to create a coherent narrative of
Mm,
your
mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
And so I can do an experiment, and I can make you do something. Like, this is what con artists kind of tap into, right?
Yeah.
I can make you do an action or feel an emotion or something without your permission and without your knowledge.
Hmm.
And if I then ask you why you did that, that part of your brain will make something up
Mm-hmm.
to fill in the gap because it needs a full storyline. And so it
Yeah.
will fill in the blank with whatever is plausible according to your worldview. In order to do that, it will also interpret circumstances through your worldview to make them fit because you're changing your mind. Metanoia,
Mm-hmm.
repentance, is extremely disruptive, body, soul, and spirit.
Yeah.
And so your brain avoids it.
Yeah.
And so
So
you
let
have
me
a
ask.
part of your brain dedicated to making things up and lying to you in order to maintain your worldview.
Let me ask this, because I hear you saying talking about. I don't remember exact the word you used when you started that answer about like being externally influenced. I guess is the general what you said, and I'm curious, like church can do that a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I'm thinking back to like getting nerdy into American church history. I'm thinking of like Charles Finney. Obviously, Billy Graham did the kind of altar calls things. I mean, based on my reading of Charles Finney's kind of practices, he really tried to, I don't know what the word would be, um, manage it in a way, take advantage of ways to kind of influence people to make a decision. Um, like knowing what we know about the brain, like, what do you think about that?
So I use Jedi ninja tricks. I
Mm-hmm.
do, but it's one step away from being a con artist and a manipulator. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I teach them, I make everybody pinky swear before heaven,
Mm-hmm.
enforceable by the angels,
Mm-hmm.
that they'll use their powers for good, because you
Mm.
can use those for evil, and people do use those for evil.
Yeah.
But people are also, I can think of churches, I can think of church experiences that use those for evil. But then we all do it with the way that we architect, the music list on a Sunday
Yeah.
morning. That's
Yep.
meant to create an emotional arc.
Right.
Is that manipulation? Well, I mean, someone may think so, and someone may not think so. So my practice is to always pull back the curtain, always explain what I'm doing, have a high transparency, full
Mm-hmm.
transparency in the journey that I'm trying to help people walk on. And then transformation only happens in the conscious mind. So there's a place where you have to leave the gap for someone to say no and to someone to
Mm.
walk away and have no shame in that. If
Okay.
you're shaming a person's negative choice, then you are manipulating. If you shame them not following you, you're being manipulative.
That's good. That's helpful. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about, as we're recording this, it's August, and of course uh, I guess I can give you some infrared information. Or I think this is relevant. Adams County just went to red status
Yeah.
for COVID, which is not great. My wife's hospital, I guess they're at yellow.
Mm,
Um, and I'm thinking about obviously the vaccine debate has become a huge conversation, and I'm seeing a lot of like logical arguments, shaming, and to me, it's just like that's not helpful. And I think we can kind of do the same thing in church, where it's hey, following Jesus. I mean, I was a child of the '90s where like Josh McDowell and what was it, Lee Strobel and all that kind of
mhm.
apologetics was like, let's just build a logical case, and people like, oh, of course, this is the most logical thing to do, follow the way of Jesus. Um, and then of course a big part of the '90s was also like I imagine you'd agree like those are not helpful ways to really bring metanoia to
Oh,
bring change. And what does that look like to I
yeah.
like the way you say it, like leave gap, yeah. I'll leave that for another question. Answer that one first.
So these are all connected.
Mm-hmm.
When we, and it's all explained in Genesis 2 and 3. So, Genesis 2, God says you need each other. Incomplete or
Mm-hmm.
single is not enough. And I don't mean single as like not married, but like solitary, solo. I mean,
Yeah.
even God exists in community, right?
Mm-hmm.
People have written about that. Love so much of that theology there, but and therefore we're created for community.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have then is you have a couple people, you have community in the garden, and they have not eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which means they don't know the difference between the knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the difference between right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the garden state, right? That's original glory.
Mm-hmm.
But then the serpent says, and that temptation and that lie and that con that, that gets Eve to eat, and now they've experienced the difference between right and wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and the knowledge of what's sin and what's righteousness. And the very first fruit of that is shame. So we continue to play this out. We say, this is right, this is wrong. We hand somebody that without relationship, and that literally creates shame. Shame has a profile in the brain. So if you correct somebody, and if you correct a child and you yell at them, and then they don't experience relational repair on the back end of that correction, it
Mm-hmm.
creates a specific chemical signature in the brain that is the emotional result of pain. The emotion is pain, there's a specific, or shame, the emotional,
Mm-hmm.
there's a specific signature for it. But if you correct them and then you bring relational repair to it, what they learn is a conviction. And so they learn it's the action that's not good, not that it's them that's not good. Because I
Mm-hmm.
correct you, you experience shame, you say, I am not good. I have to repair that to say, no, you're good. It's the action that's not good. And that is a different, that is
Yeah.
a signature. So
Yep.
in the church, we say, you're right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, and we have no relationship. We are creating shame. And shame can never create metanoia.
Yeah.
Shame is the tool of
Yeah.
the enemy, right? So
Yeah.
shame is never a tool of God
Let's
because
just
he
say that one more time. Shame is never a tool of God.
shame is never a tool of God because he never corrects us outside of relational repair and relationship.
Hmm.
So when we disciple people by handing them this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what's sin, this is what's righteousness,
Mm-hmm.
and we are in deep abiding relationship with them and in deep abiding relationship with God, the fruit is shame. The fruit, according to Paul, is death because we're just handing people the law. And that's what this mind, this neo-reformed, or whatever. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
version of it in almost every stream where we're
Yeah.
like, no, it's all about being right and righteousness and
Mm-hmm.
having the correct theology and the correct understanding of God. Apart from relationship and full dependence on God, the fruit is shame, the fruit is death. God set it up to fail that path. And we have doubled down. We've put all our eggs in that basket for a long time. And I think what you're seeing with the Mars Hill and this whole thing is
Mm-hmm.
the culmination of that unchecked paradigm to its natural ends.
Hmm. Wow. That's a great conversation here. Uh, I want to follow up to that question, but there's been another question rattling around in my brain that I have to ask you. I'm seeing this a lot on Twitter, definitely in the left, the left wing spectrum of Twitter of like this idea. I don't know if I can properly put it into words, but kind of this idea that like, as I would interpret it, like, you know, everyone's, I don't know, I wouldn't quite call it like the blank slate type thing, but like just let everybody kind of, how do I say it? Like, if we just throw all the information out there, people will make their own decisions. And I wonder, like, is that kind of like a pipe dream? Like, are we discounting the ways that like we influence and are influenced?
Yeah, it totally. Information will never change somebody's mind. And but we've made information the god of transformation. And I come out of education.
Yeah.
Education says, well, no, if we just tell them the right stuff and we tell them more of the right
Yep.
stuff,
Yep.
then they'll make the right choice. But, I know I shouldn't eat a cookie and they do it anyway, right? Information doesn't lead anybody into the path of truth
I mean, I
or the
guess
path
like
of life.
I guess looking at fast food counters, like it has not stopped me from ordering my Big Mac or whatever, seeing calorie counts on there.
Yeah. It doesn't work. And when you put all of your effort there, then you just get louder and louder. People won't make the life-giving choice. People will never make the life-giving choice based on information. We are created to be relational. Relationship is the only pathway that gets us there. And
People will never
so,
make it based on information.
no, we're not created to.
Okay, I'm processing and writing it down, so that's why it's connected.
But so these are all connected, right? Right?
Yeah.
The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil will never bring life. The
Hmm.
information of what's right and what's wrong will never bring life.
Hmm.
And so we have to let that go. But in a world without the cross, in the world without a pathway of metanoia, of
Hmm.
repentance, that is all you have. And
Hmm.
so the church has continued to try to just use these worldly methods to do stuff, and so then we socially shame, right? Cancel
Yep.
culture on one end,
Hmm.
um, fundamentalism on the other, right? So we have these different mechanisms of shaming, which also will never lead to life or
Yeah.
transformation.
Yeah. I heard it this weekend from a pastor, and I again would definitely would definitely identify myself as someone on the left end of the spectrum, but I would agree, like, there's fundamentalism. As someone who grew up in right wing fundamentalism, there's definitely fundamentalism and shaming on both sides, and I'm not for any of it. Like, literally experienced it, growing up in right wing fundamentalism, and experienced how toxic and, I don't know, just painful it can be. Like, it's not gonna help anything. That's my soapbox.
Right, because either version, whether it's left or right or whatever,
Hmm.
whatever, if you say, hey, here's the right way, you don't have a relationship with someone, you don't love
Yeah.
them, you're not, you don't have that covenantal, deep, bond with them, the permission to speak into their life and their permission for them to speak into your life. If you don't have
Yeah.
that, and you're just like, here's what you should be doing, and then they don't line up with you, and then you shame them, like you're doing exactly what the serpent did in the garden. And
Hmm.
again, I want to be with God where he is. I want to do what he does. I don't want to do what the world does and what the enemy does.
Hmm.
So,
So, so again, I'm hearing like relationship, relationship, relationship is the key through all this, and I'm wondering, like, I feel like as we started out like on a 30,000 foot view, and we're diving in here slowly. I don't know if we're gonna have time to like get it down to the molecular level, but I'm thinking of like the kind of the standard church weekend experience. How does that help or hinder, this process? What about Sunday morning is pro this, or helps build a relationship? And what is it just like kind of antithetical? Should we maybe stop doing or reconsider?
yeah, I mean the part where we gather and we're with one another
Mm-hmm.
obviously can build relationship. It can. It doesn't always, right? So
Mm-hmm. Yep.
false sense of community you get from a large crowd or,
Yep.
on one end, and then, I love the intro my husband's super introverted, and so he would prefer a liturgical, I don't have to talk to anybody. I can pass the peace because I can remember that and it's not someone's name, like
Yeah.
he'll find
Yeah.
value in that. But at the end of the day, we need to know and be known by one another. And so, whatever helps facilitate that, right? I don't want my church experience to be like the grocery store where I go, I get
Mm-hmm.
fed, I pick what I want, I say hi to people and I'm friendly and I leave, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think I think the community we have at church should be different than the grocery store.
Yeah. But it.
Because so it depends on I love the different models and methods,
Mm-hmm.
but if you have a culture and environment that says how we are with one another is what matters most, and
Hmm.
building those relationships and dynamics, union with God, covenant with one another, then you can do that with other methods you want. But you can
Mm-hmm.
also have all those methods and not that atmosphere, not that culture. And what you're actually doing is you're giving people a placebo.
Hmm. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
think they have the thing, but they don't have the thing.
So if I'm hearing you, then really whatever kind of or context we're inviting people in, needs to be ultimately about a deeper relationship with one another, and I imagine as part of that with God. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Well, I think
Because
maybe finally
that's
catching on.
no, you're doing great. Like these are all the things, right? All of
Hmm.
the pains and the problems. And we always want to solve them practically, but we have to solve them if we're really going to make a difference, we have to solve them at their root. And that is, what has God actually called us to do? And if he's not called us to have enough information to pass the test, there's not a test to get into
Hmm.
heaven.
Yeah.
But what there is, did I know you? Which means, did I allow myself to be known by God? Was I intimate in
Hmm.
with God? And then how did you treat other people? Those are the questions that are
Hmm.
asked. Not the knowledge of God questions as far as like pure theology.
You know, this is kind of me processing here for a little bit, but I'm just thinking like, as a pastor, I'll say this like, I hate sitting in the pews. I hate it, and I'm in a context right now where I'm sitting. But I'm wondering like maybe that's like part of it. Like it's hard to get kind of build relationship in the pews on a Sunday morning, and maybe that's one of the. I don't know. What do you think? Is that one of the big maybe detriments of whatever we want to call like the modern worship experience? Is that it can often be seen as the like that's the thing you need to do to be Christian? Like show up, be in the pews, and you're good.
Yeah, I mean that also comes out to us from the Reformation, right? So that teaching that disciples are made when the word, the Bible is appropriately mediated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
And when
good.
you've made that, that is 100% wrong.
Uh huh.
Biologically, neurobiologically, biblically, like
Uh
that
huh.
statement is 100% wrong. But
Hmm.
we've designed everything around that. Now, I love like what Charles Wesley did, where
Mm-hmm.
he had pews that would flip. So he would teach a concept, then they would flip into little small groups in the church, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now we're having a small group discussion. Okay, flip it back. We're going to bring it back, and you could do a rhythm of that and go through 3 points and get a depth of both
Mm-hmm.
transformation in understanding as well as relationship building in a church environment, in a Sunday gathering. It's just on how you roll that out. And so people have been innovative and tapped into how we actually transform. It's just that doesn't look good in we lost that in the last 30 years, 50
Yeah.
years. We
I
went we
mean,
went a different direction.
it's hard to just the logistics of such would be hard in like a group of 1,000 people to break them into groups in a I would think in a meaningful or not meaningful in a time conscious in a time context you know within the bounds of what you're working with at the time. But I love that if I'm hearing you right, that general idea of like I've I was trying to do that, and I think that would be a great idea of like having a message, but then like inviting conversation afterwards, whether it's part of the formal gathering, whatever, to say like, hey, what do y'all think? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, but I've done it with groups of thousands.
Oh,
You just have people, okay, turn to each other. You've got five
uh-huh.
minutes. Find groups of twos and threes. Discuss this question or share this thing, and
Mm-hmm.
then you just put like a counter, like the
Yeah.
worship team has the count, the
Yeah.
countdown,
Yep.
and then you bring it back. So it doesn't matter if it's 20. It doesn't matter if it's 2,000. Is I'm confident as a facilitator in my ability to bring them back,
Yeah.
and that's all that matters. But it totally scales. It totally
Hmm.
is doable.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. So I'm guessing like obviously you're facilitating opportunities to build a relationship there. What else neurologically maybe happens during those kind of conversations that is important?
Gosh, I mean, so much. I don't, that would take a whole other conversation,
Fair enough.
to unpack. But just understanding the pathways of how we actually change don't include having the right information.
Hmm.
The right information is like third in
Mm-hmm.
the whole process, because it's about relationship. And so I am just hoping. as we move forward in this new era of the church, that we can actually find a way to get to real disciple making, real passion and union with God. Information doesn't go away because, again, I love the Bible. Theology is awesome, but it needs to take its rightful place, which is usually like third in the priority list. So orthodoxy leads to orthopraxy. And
Hmm.
I'd just love to see churches find their own voice and in their theological stream and in their model, whatever that is, just find their way to that so that we can be a people of God that he recognizes and the world recognizes as a people of God.
Hmm.
That's what I hope for.
I just want to point out for our Methodist listeners, Jesse is going to be working with Methodists perhaps in the future. So you heard a Charles Wesley shout out. So just remember that she's pro Charles.
Well,
I'll get
and
that
I
right.
come from Foursquare, which is
Yeah.
a couple generations down
Yeah.
Wesley, and I've
Yeah.
worked with the Wesleyan coalition a little bit, so
Us,
I
us
love Wesley.
mainliners, us mainliners can be very loyal to our founders and influencers.
Yeah, it's
Well,
true.
I promise this will be my last question here before we take a break. I'm thinking about like sacraments. Obviously, Protestants generally refer to them as ordinances or whatever. Um, is I think I'm forgetting what the seven are from the Catholic Church. Is preaching considered a sacrament?
Gosh,
Well,
I don't know. I
I'll
don't
have to
know. It
I'll
is
have
in
to
the
look that up.
Presbyterian Church. It's the only sacrament, right?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Like, I don't know if obviously many evangelicals wouldn't use these words, but based on kind of the context of most modern worship services, singing music slash singing music and then preaching are like the two sacraments, so to speak. Um, do we need to develop to utilize? I'm not sure even the question asked other means of grace, and I know I'm getting really loaded here theologically in my question to help people experience God.
Yeah, but I think that there's some great writings out there that can help us do that, right? Martin Buber, I'm a huge fan of Balthasar, Hans von Balthasar,
Mm-hmm.
who was Catholic and did talk about different types of ways that grace is mediated. I think, if anything, the evangelical church has stripped so many of those out that the only way grace is mediated is their pastor, which is why there's so many. Although
Wow.
theologically they would say, no, the priesthood of all believers, and that
Yeah.
conviction stands in great contrast. That's why the praxis is so weird, because without those structures and teaching around those structures, they end up default in the pastor, and that kills pastors too, because that's a huge weight to put on a
Yeah.
pastor's shoulders from the congregation, and why they're working 100 million hours with people who are thankless, and maybe get an attaboy or attagirl. Well, no, probably not an attagirl, but anyway, an attaboy.
Hmm.
It's eating them alive too, because they're not created to be the mediator of grace, and most of them don't want to. Most are not, like Mark Driscoll. Most
Yeah.
are amazing, humble, lost humans who are just trying to be faithful to the call of God in their life. So they're set up for failure by that system as well. So my heart for pastors is huge, because I think it's a job description crafted in hell, literally,
Hmm.
and I just
Hmm.
want to help them find the space of grace.
Wow. Well, I do want to do this just before we take a break. I just wanted to affirm, like, I can only imagine as a female working in spaces that are often male dominated, how challenging that can be. So, just uh, blessings and peace, and then keep up the good work, I guess I'd say. So,
Oh, thank you.
hang in there. Let's take a break, and we'll come back with some closing questions. Mint, are you good?
I'm good.
Okay.
But your time is almost up. Are you
I know,
okay?
I know. Don't take too long in your answers, because I'm just
Okay.
on a phone call. All right, we're back with Jesse Cruikshank. getting that name right here finally. The closing questions, you can take as seriously or not as you'd like to, but if you're Pope for a day, what do you want to do?
Oh my gosh, that sounds terrifying. Um, so I think if I were Pope for the day, I think I would just give it over to Jesus, which sounds like a super cop out answer, and it probably is. Because I mean, I don't know. I would eat Italian food all day. I love Italian food.
Sure.
Maybe I
Yeah.
would build myself a house in Italy or get a house in Italy. So I
Yeah.
love that country. But I just love the diversity of humanity and the diversity of the body of Christ. So could I make all of it okay and say it's all legit? I might do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Pope can do that. I mean, you're kind of defining what Pope can do, so Pope can do that. A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life.
Yeah, I mentioned Hans von Balthasar, and I'd love to meet him. And then the gal who actually inspired him, who he wrote stuff for, and her name is Adriana von Speyer, and I would love to meet her because she was actually like a Catholic mystic,
Hmm.
and she just had some experiences with God that I would love to just hear those stories. So the two of them, can I get two? I'm still Pope for
Yeah.
the day. I can
Yeah.
bring back
Yeah.
two.
Yeah. You have to email me the spelling of those names because I've, uh,
Sure.
yeah. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
I think that they'll remember it as a dark period,
Mm-hmm.
that we had lost the plot for 30 to 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that we're getting it back. Like I do really believe we're entering a time of renewal where we'll correct that, mind of man being the highest good kind of thing.
Hmm.
I think yeah, I think there's some good correction coming, but the last chunk has been really dark and we've really missed God. We've really missed the heart of God. But he's faithful. And so, yeah, that's what I think that they'll see in this time period.
Awesome. What are your hopes for the future of Christianity?
Oh man, that we partner well with that and as many people join that as possible. I mean, to me, the worst thing that could happen would be that we try to keep alive something Jesus is letting die. Right?
Hmm.
So to me that makes a Frankenstein. And the monster kills things. I mean, it doesn't mean to, but it just does. So the actual monster is Dr. Frankenstein, the one
Mm-hmm.
who played
Mm-hmm.
God and tried to keep things alive that were dying and dead. And I would hope that we aren't that.
So keeping alive what Jesus is trying to let die.
Yeah.
So good. Writing that down.
Horror stories.
Yeah.
People have lived these horror stories.
I
I'm
assume
sure
you
someone
read
right now is thinking of it.
you read that book, right? Frankenstein. Such an interesting, yeah, such an interesting story. Um, all right. Well, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so I'm available in a few different places. I have a website with my nerdy stuff called Your Brain by Jess. Also,
Mm-hmm.
my Twitter handle and my Instagram, although I'm not very good at Instagram. I have my own ministry on disciple making called Whoology co, and you can go there. And then for church consulting, denominational consulting, and coaching, I work with the Future Church with Will Mancini and Dave Rhodes and Kelly Camisher, and so you can reach me through them. So different
Well,
different pathways.
yeah, this has been a great conversation. Appreciate your time so much, and may God's peace be with you.
And also with you.